Thank you, Scott, and good evening, everybody. Always great to be here. Yeah, Scott mentioned we start these with the topic, and I have a topic for tonight. And it's usually based on kind of the buzz I hear from clients and issues that are dealing with, and one that we've talked about before, but I don't think in a long time. And that is really developing worthiness. I think so many of us as addicts and as partners, frankly, really struggle with core beliefs that are negative. We're not enough, we're not lovable, we're somehow doomed. And these really impede our ability to embrace recovery. And so there's some major kind of shifts, I think, that we have to do and work, psychological work, to really embrace and rewire and rewrite those beliefs about ourselves. So I have 7 just skills sets, basically points that we can use to develop worthiness, because I think most of us come into this pretty much in a negative and at a deficit in terms of how we feel about ourselves and our worthiness in general. So let me start with that. Number 1, believe you have inherent value. I think a lot of us, especially as addicts, felt that we had these core beliefs that we're unlovable, we can't do anything right, we're unworthy, we're unsafe. A lot of negative messaging that made sense, frankly, in the family of origin that we came from. Typically, I mean, kids don't just adopt those because they're random. They adopt them because they're safety mechanisms in those families. But the problem is we leave those families, we grow up, and we're still carrying around those beliefs, and that impacts our marriages, our relationships, even our life trajectory and life and quality of life, right? How we see ourselves. So I think really working on those core beliefs is really important. One other factor that we see a lot in sex and porn addiction is an individual who may have experienced sexual abuse as a kid, and that really, what we call, hijacks the arousal template, so that kids that are sexually abused, doesn't matter if they're male or female, really start to see their worth and their value in sexual terms. And so, and a therapist will say they've been sexualized, but really we see 8, 9, 10-year-olds who sort of flirt, and they're very they just see themselves as sexual, and they're willing to do things that I guess in the larger view would be considered inappropriate. So that sexual thing really sets somebody off on a trajectory for their whole life, frankly, until they get trauma therapy or some kind of other therapy as an adult. And finally, what do we do? What's the adult struggle with unhealthy validation? We start to seek validation, right? We seek it in unhealthy ways. And so this is also very common for sex addicts, particularly, to seek validation from women or men or whoever, whatever, to know that they're okay. And this is, I think, whether they're doing that overtly or not, that's a phenomenon that we see with all addicts, and that we don't feel very good about ourselves. So we create this false self on the outside that is esteemable, if you will. So that might be the right car, the big income, the right house, the right address, the trophy wife, the trophy husband, all that to make ourselves feel good and look good. And that the world says, oh boy, that's great. The problem is, for me on the inside, I know that I'm still suffering from those core beliefs, and all that accolades and validation doesn't do much for me. It feels hollow. So anyway, believe we have inherent value. The second one, I think, to embrace those challenges, based on what I just said, with these old decisions, these old beliefs about ourselves, we really have to really address those directly. And there's many ways we can do that. We can work in therapy on changing these core beliefs, the negative ones and the positive ones. We can do that through affirmations, which Scott and I often talk about in this webinar, to how valuable they are, even on a daily basis. I recommend posting one on a Post-it note and put it on your mirror, on your monitor, or somewhere where you're going to kind of see it and just let it soak in a kind of a casual way. But we have to really, in the course of recovery, whether your partner or an addict, have to recover from these challenges as we go through. And those challenges are largely going to be rooted in some of these misconceptions about who we are and our beliefs about ourselves. So that's another really important one. I think third, this may be a little different for people than might not have thought about, but don't underestimate the power of the word yet. I think sometimes we think in recovery, we're just going to flick a switch and everything's going to be good, and we're good to go. And remember, most of us have been in our addiction for years and decades, and these habits are deeply grooved, they're automatic, and we have to really challenge those in countless ways every day. And that daily challenging over time is going to have an impact that we want. We don't have to do it all today. We don't have to do it all tomorrow, right? Patience. And I think patience is something that a lot of intensity addicts, which is what sex and porn addicts are, and amphetamine addicts too, by the way. Patience isn't a hallmark, right? A strong suit. Just today in a group, I was asking our clients to set a timer for 1 or 2 minutes to sit still and just be quiet. And that kind of quiet is really difficult to do for somebody who's used to filling up that space. Number 4, don't be threatened by the success of others. And I think it's so easy for addicts, whether in our disease or in our recovery, to compare ourselves to everybody else. And we think we really have to understand that this is not a zero-sum game, where the winner takes all. There's recovery enough for everybody. There's growth enough for everybody. There's love and connection and belonging enough for everybody. And I think that's really important because, and we see this from the very beginning, so many sex addicts will walk into a 12-step meeting, whether it doesn't matter what fellowship it is, and they look around, and the problem with sex addiction is there's so many different ways somebody can act out. And so I might be a porn addict, but I see somebody who acts with escorts, or somebody else who does sugar babies online and says, well, I don't have anything in common with those people. I've never done that. And we compare ourselves and set ourselves apart. We actually have to do the exact opposite. What do I have in common with this person? And if we can get below those really almost superficial details of how we act out, it's the same thing, the same beliefs, the same crazy addiction having power of us, the same lack of control and manageability in our life. So really trying to and if I see somebody else doing well and a little shadow doubt crosses my mind of like envy, or I just I wish them well, and I know that will be for me too. So I think we just have to kind of take it easy. That comparison thing is really a problem, and that happens, by the way, not just in recovery, acting out strategies, but bodies and clothes, all that stuff we talked about with that false self before still continues in recovery until we move past that and start to find, and this is really the big change we have to do in recovery, switch from, getting our validation from outside ourselves to getting it from inside ourselves, to knowing that I'm okay. Even if the world is giving me messages on any given day that no, things are really crappy, you need to do something, but I can ride it out because at my heart, I know that I'm doing what I need to do. And I think that's just really important. But the bottom line, recovery is not a competition, right? Recovery is for me. And that's all. Employ positive self-talk. I mentioned the affirmations a few minutes ago. Addicts, and I think partners too, really have what we call in psychology a negativity bias, because of all the crap that's happened over the years, the lack of transparency, the lack of honesty, the disappointments, the betrayals. We get a real negative attitude. And I think it's really hard to see sometimes the bright spots and the small, green shoots that are starting to emerge in recovery, and we can miss them. So I think to really try to at least balance, glass half full as opposed to glass half empty. That's going to be something that also takes time, because that's a habit. Negativity is a habit. And so that takes time and patience as well. Couple more to talk about in terms of beliefs, changing beliefs, to believe that I am enough as I am, right? And as I'm working, I don't need any more degrees. I don't need any more, I don't need bigger biceps. I don't need to lose 20 pounds. I don't need to have a different address or drive a different car. I am enough right here and now. And when I got sober, it was in a pretty low bottom meeting with a lot of homeless people and people recently released from mental hospitals, asylums in New York. It was a crazy meeting, and I fit right in. But what I realized in that is I had all I needed to survive in that moment and get recovery, and that's all I needed as a start. But I think that really is important to remember that we are enough as we are. And then finally, beliefs. We talked about beliefs, but to believe 3 things: I'm worthy of dignity, I'm worthy of respect, and I'm worthy of good things. And I think, with dignity, I don't know any addict that really had dignity. And I think we drag our families down, so probably families don't have much dignity left either. But in recovery, we can always have a sense of dignity, right? Even if we're having struggles and challenges, because it's rooted in how we approach it. If we're approaching with authenticity, with goodwill, with transparency, with really trying, I think that's more than enough to earn any dignity that we need to have. The same thing goes with respect. I never respected myself. People didn't respect me. Respect was not a word that I was familiar with, certainly in addiction. In fact, quite the opposite. I really loathed myself. And I think that's really true of a lot of addicts as well. We might be kind of narcissistic and all full of bravado, but at some core level, there's a lot of loathing and kind of disgust with ourselves at some point. We may be in denial of that, but one of the things we do when people come to treatment at Seek Integrity, for example, we try to break through that. And when they finally feel that, we can catch them, right? We're there to support them. But that process of starting to feel that opens the door to change and recovery, by the way. And then finally, good things. I deserve, and I may not have it today, but I have always believed I deserve a comfortable home, a good relationship, a good partner, a loving and supportive friends, all the good stuff. And I think if we expect it and we really work for it, it does start to happen. And I'm not being all Pollyanna-ish, but just hard work and program pays off. And I think that's the bottom line. So I think, we are programmed to really not think very much of ourselves, to not be worthy, but we really have to, in many different areas, in different ways, we can change that. And that'll make our life a lot more enjoyable and our recovery for sure. Thanks.
Thank you, David. As an addict, worthiness is sort of the opposite of shame to me. And, I always feel like shame is the master emotion for certainly myself. And I think for most addicts.
I agree.
So this is such a, sorry, I have people documents on my desk and the cats are chewing them. Both cats on the same document. So this developing worthiness is also developing sobriety. If I can cure my shame, which I don't know that we ever cure our shame, but then I can cure some of my need to escape into a substance or behavior instead of reaching out to other people in a healthy way.
Right.
Is shame curable, number one? And can you talk a little bit about the relationship between this lack of worthiness and how it drives us into addictions?
Yeah. So first of all, about shame. Shame, and I agree with you. That's the kind of the core feature of a lot of addicts, but almost universally among sex addicts and porn addicts. And that was identified way back, by Patrick Carnes 30 years ago. So that's a theme that hasn't changed. But shame, when we think about it, and this is something I tell the clients, nobody's born with shame. That's not something you get at birth, right? Shame is really given to us and it's imposed on us by it. We're told, by our families of origin, by teachers, by bullies, by the law that says, what you're doing is wrong or illegal, and by the church. There's so many areas where people are judging what we do and who we are. And I think for kids, remember, kids are very, very vulnerable in terms of their mental wiring, if you will. If an adult tells a kid, you're never going to make it, you always screw everything up, what a loser you are. The kid doesn't have the psychological ability to say, that's crap, I'm going to show you. The kid takes it in, a kid believes it. And that is just devastating, because those repeated messages get really deeply ingrained in a child and affects this lifelong kind of savings account, a reserve of shame that just stays there until we release it and give it away. And I think that shame is what leads to this whole belief. Remember, shame is not feeling bad about something we did, it's a feeling bad about us. We are flawed. The most devastating phrase I've heard a lot of my chemsex clients use is, I feel like damaged goods. It's like this, who would want me? I'm just damaged. And that's no foundation to start a recovery on, right? And so those kind of processes really need to look at starting to get rid of some of that shame. We talk with our clients about moving shame to guilt, for in some cases, so they can really feel what they did and take ownership of that, as opposed to just feeling like, oh, I'm such a terrible person. Let's get more specific, and because you can do something with guilt, you can talk about it and kind of move it. But the other thing with shame is it just really needs to be released. And I think it's something that we are so fearful of letting anybody know, our deepest, beliefs about ourselves, our secrets. Every week we get clients coming to Seek Integrity saying, I have these secrets and I will take them to my grave. I'm never going to share them. And with a little prodding, we can usually get them to start talking about it in the safety of our group. And it's so important. And you see this, the relief of people when they can share something they feel a deadly shame about, and just and be accepted by the group. And I remember Dr. Rob once explaining, it's so true that when somebody can open up and be vulnerable, other people will lean in. They don't run away. And my fear as an addict is that people are going to run screaming, I'll have nobody in my life, right? Because they're all going to be judging me. No, it's the exact opposite, which is so counterintuitive, at least for an addict. But I think that process of releasing shame, Scott, you talk a lot about Brene Brown and the great work she's done on shame and shame release. But, she, in simple terms, she talks about the shame just really being kind of cleaned and cleansed and sanitized once it gets daylight, right? And so we have to really release it. And just finally, I'm talking a lot about this, but in my own experience with shame, I think it's typical for addicts. I was able to release a whole bunch of it at first, but in my mind, again, it's not like flicking a switch. Releasing shame for me has been a lifelong journey, because I'll be fine for, I don't know, a couple of months, and then I'll hit a pocket of something, right? Something will happen, and I have to work on that. And it's usually the same issues, but maybe a deeper level. So that shame release is incredibly important.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't think the shame tapes ever really go away. I mean, I still have the shame tapes playing in my head. I've just done enough work that I know that, they're not true. If I show you the real me, you will not run screaming from the room, which is, a core belief for me. But I know it's not true now. I've done enough work, but I still, that's like the first response for me sometimes. It's like, no, clam up, shut up, don't tell anybody.
And the same is true with me. And even with core beliefs, sometimes I'll have that, it'll pop up, but now I've know enough, I'll just go to plan B, just kind of, okay, there that is, let's just go over here. And I know how to do that now. I've done it long enough.
Yeah. So, okay, let's jump into the Q&A, shall we? This first one here, I'm a recovering sex addict. I'm doing well with sexual sobriety, 27 months now. Congratulations. However, I'm still struggling with my character defects, which my wife calls emotional sobriety. And she remains traumatized even 3.5 years after discovery, defensiveness, minimizing, various forms of denial, etc. When I act that way, she sees the same person that she saw during the height of my acting out. Yet I continue to struggle to stay out of those places when she confronts me with anger. Any suggestions to better my emotional sobriety? What a fantastic question, and right on topic. I mean,
yeah, for sure. And good for you, Mike. That's a long time.
We don't use names, David. Sorry.
Bill,
Brad,
right.
George, Bob, whoever it was.
Sorry. But what I want to say is that this is not an unusual situation, right? And we've talked here before about sobriety versus kind of recovery, and we sometimes we get a little bit mired in that, getting rid of some of these old habits. And I love the term emotional sobriety, actually, because it really perfectly describes. And then very often in this webinar, we have questions where people will say, my husband is blaming or not taking responsibility or deflecting or whatever. And those are all signs, right? It's not acting out, but it's a really dangerous sign. And for a traumatized spouse, it's as good as the original thing, because it re-triggers all that stuff. So I guess what I would encourage you to do is to really, I assume you're maybe still in therapy, and bring this to your CSAT or your therapist, because when I see this, usually there's something there that we can't really see that's kind of a block. And there's, we talk sometimes about payoffs for holding on to those things, for not moving forward, but it feels a little bit like you're stuck. And I know in my life, when I've been stuck, I needed somebody to kind of really help deconstruct or push that. And so I think with your therapist, you might want to explore maybe what is this going on, and what you can do to help that processing. In the meantime, is some of the steps we talked about tonight, which is really start to look at those core beliefs, to look at what what you need, how you feel about yourself. But yeah, this is a painful situation, and it's not something that you want to stay mired in. And this is already a long time. So I think I'd really take it to your therapist and see. And it might take a little bit of a jolt, maybe a weekend workshop, or maybe something different to get a little more intensive and kind of break the rhythm a little bit, get out of your comfort zone. Because I think in recovery, we as addicts can kind of get comfortable in our discomfort. We kind of go a little ways and then stop growing. And because it's hard, it's uncomfortable, and sometimes we just don't know what we need to fight. Where's the wall? I can't feel it that I need to push through. So I think that's where a therapist could help. But you've been doing this a long time. I guess my suggestion would be to shake it up a little bit. And that's why I suggest maybe a weekend workshop or a work group or just something to get new information, a new approach. And in my own life, that's been a really useful tool to kind of shake up whatever set of circumstances have locked me up and got me stuck in place.
Yeah. I mean, to get all 12-stepping on everybody. You want to break out of the rut, be of service, number one. Start helping other people. When I give advice, I kind of have to take my own advice sometimes. So when I'm telling people, yeah, defensiveness isn't getting you anywhere, is it? I have to remember, defensiveness doesn't get us anywhere. So be of service, work the 12 steps. If you haven't worked them already, work them. And if you have worked them, go back and work them again. The 12 steps are about identifying our character defects and letting go of them. That's steps 4 through 9 right there. Identify my character defects and work on them. I'm always working on a character defect. I'm 20 years sober from this addiction, 18 from alcohol and drugs. I'm still working on character defects every single day. I usually pick one a month and work on it. And it's a slow process. I used to go to a meeting called Emotional Sobriety. It was an AA meeting, not an SAA meeting. It was a wonderful meeting. There is a book called Emotional Sobriety, and it's a 2-part book now from the good people at AA. I put the link to the first one in the chat feature. I highly recommend picking up that book. It's just little short snippets about emotional sobriety, and you could use it as a daily reader or pick one a week and work on it that week. So yeah, but definitely working the 12 steps. What character defect am I working on, and where am I in the steps with it? Usually is a good question for me, because there is a difference between being sober and being in recovery. Being sober means I'm not drinking, I'm not acting out. Being in recovery means I'm working on the little things. And it sounds like you're ready to work on the little things.
Right.
I love that you asked this question. It's time. You're good to go. Now is right on schedule as far as I'm concerned. So yeah. Anything else, David?
No, I think that's great. And thank you for bringing the steps in, because it's such a concrete kind of pathway that helps us through this process. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, therapy is great for this stuff, but I got to be honest, for me, working in the 12 steps was where I got emotional sobriety. It's where I learned how to deal with the world, was by working the 12 steps.
Hey, Scott, let me ask you, and in the past, sometimes I've recommitted to 90 and 90. I kind of upped the intensity of my 12-step involvement. Is that something you'd recommend in a case like this?
Oh, yeah. I mean, anytime you're struggling with something, 90 and 90, or even 30 and 30, just up your game a little bit. You said it, change it up, try something different, try something new. And yeah, I mean, if I'm doing 3 meetings a week, do a meeting a day for 30 days, see what happens. Yeah, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So change something, pretty straightforward. But easier to say than do.
Yeah.
This is from a trade partner. It's been over 2 years since discovery. There's been 4 discoveries since the initial discovery. They've not had a full therapeutic disclosure. My partner's CSAT says he needs more time to get to a stage where he's ready to work on it. My partner tells me he's prepared to do a disclosure, and he doesn't know why his CSAT would say he isn't ready, and that it doesn't come up in their sessions. What possible reasons would the CSAT have to be holding off? All yours, David.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a mystery. What happens in therapeutic process is pretty closed in. It is kind of a weird discrepancy though, if the addict is saying they're ready and the therapist is saying they're not. When I have held off on disclosure, it's usually for some of the kind of emotional issue or get the addict ready kind of support wise for the process of the disclosure. But I'm not sure. I guess I would ask your partner to bring it back to the CSAT. And I think at this point, especially if there's been these kind of ongoing discoveries, that must keep you in a kind of terrible place of anxiety. So I think kind of the sooner the better for this process, because discovery is really a kind of a cleansing a benchmark. Really, if it works well, it's a critical step kind of springing into the next stage of recovery. And so to hold off is unfortunate, I think. Now, there may be good reason. I don't know what that is, but I think it's something that certainly would be useful to talk about. One thing I've had, not this particular case, but it's not unusual for to have occasional joint sessions. So maybe you want to go into your husband's therapy session with the three of you and talk about this and have your needs, your wants and needs verbalized and see what they say. Because in very many ways, you're part of this process, you're affected by it. And that might be a way to kind of get light on what's happening. There may be a very good reason. I can't think of what it is offhand, but the only way is to kind of inquire. And I think it's not unreasonable for you to kind of push this issue and your husband too, because it's time. It's time.
Yeah, in early recovery, there are reasons to hold off because the addict is still in denial. The addict is not able to get fully honest with himself, let alone you, for generally the first several months of recovery. Usually disclosure, the process, we start working on it somewhere between 3 and 6 months, and it's given fairly soon after. As soon as we get the addict through the denial, so that he can unlock his own secrets, because addicts are very good at compartmentalizing and forgetting, things that have happened. And we do exercises with the guys at the house. We do them in the online work groups where we do timelines, and guys are like, oh my God, they have revelation after revelation after revelation. They start to remember things that they have either forced themselves to forget or just got lost in the show. So it does take a while for the addict to organize his thoughts and to become willing to be fully honest. The one thing you don't want with disclosure is for him to do a full therapeutic disclosure, but not tell you everything and then take his polygraph and fail it. That's a nightmare. So his CSAT may just be looking at him going, nope, not honest yet, not capable of giving a proper disclosure. That's the only reason I can think of at the 2-year mark. I mean, unless he's been acting out, you need like 3 to 6 months of actual sobriety. And I'm not talking about, emotional sobriety. I'm just talking about not acting out and really becoming honest. But yeah, 2 years post discovery, I don't know how long he's been seeing his CSAT, but I agree with David. It's time. And you need it. Clearly, you're asking the question. You need it.
Yeah. It's only fair to you.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know why it would still be getting put off unless your husband is not being honest in therapy. And if he can't even be honest in therapy, he either needs a new therapist or he needs to rethink his goals with life here. I'm sorry, I'm digging into your addict and I don't know the whole story. I mean, sometimes we answer these questions and we just read into them a little bit.
Right.
So, yeah. Speaking of rigorous honesty, the next question, rigorous honesty. I struggle with this. I'm doing the steps. I have a sponsor. I'm working with a therapist. I'm honest in certain parts of my life. I couldn't keep my job if I lied, but with my wife, I have so much anxiety about telling her information that I think would make me look bad or of failing in recovery. So even though when I've shared, and so he's saying he struggles to tell the truth, even though when he shared his struggles, she has responded really well. Much better when he tells her than when she finds out afterward. Why is this? At work, if I make a mistake, I own it. At home, I hide and lie. This is very common, by the way. So yeah, and I just want to validate on behalf of betrayed partners everywhere. I'd much rather you tell me than me find out on my own the hard way. So yes, I'm still going to get mad at you about what you did, but I'm not going to get mad at you also for lying and keeping it secrets. And one more thing I want to validate for betrayed partners. This is research backed by Dr. Rob conducted the research. It's less about what the addict does and more about the lies and secrets. That's the hardest part to overcome. So, okay, David, all yours now.
Yeah, no, that was great, Scott. And I agree with everything you said. And I think, with rigorous honesty is one that's hard. We've talked many times about how lying gets kind of ingrained. It becomes a habit. So it's not unusual for addicts in the beginning, at least, to sort of lie just about stupid stuff they don't need to lie about. We've talked before about the guy who told his wife he took out the garbage and he hadn't, and then did, and she saw him, and it was a big deal. So we do this, and we shoot ourselves in the foot. That I expect that to get better over time in recovery, so the lying goes away. The good news here is that you sound like you're capable of telling the truth, at least in certain spheres of your life. But the home, of course, is the most important. And I understand what you write. There's a huge fear of how she's going to react, will your marriage survive, all this, if she really knows the truth. And that's of course the big chasm that people have to jump over, right, in the course of a disclosure, because there's a lot of fear about that, and it has to go directly with what we talked about at the beginning tonight, with beliefs that I'm not enough, and negative core beliefs about ourselves, that we somehow aren't worthy and able to have an opinion and all that. So I think to really, hopefully in therapy, you're working on some of those issues, those deeper issues of self, right? Core belief issues, affirmations, looking at how you think and what that fear is. And I think if you were my client in therapy, I'd really focus in on that anxiety and see what that's all about, because I suspect anxiety has been a theme in your life in more ways than one, right? So to really sort of deconstruct that is as a way to kind of help you take the power out of that anxiety. The other thing that might be useful is role play, and even role play with your therapist. Practice what disclosing what it might be like, so you can physically go through the motions, which it's a role play, but we know from research that really does help prepare the body and help move past some of the barriers. So I think first of all, I commend you for identifying the issue, for knowing what spheres you're struggling in, for having the goal of rigorous honesty. All that's really good. But I think what you need to do is really figure out, again, where those blocks are and really tackle them and move forward, because the disclosure is really important. And it's just going to, and that for everybody, for you, for your wife, just to talk about that is going to be really important. So I'd work on whatever obstacle that is for you and try to work through it.
Yeah. Just to add a little bit, rigorous honesty means tell the truth and tell it faster. It means tell the whole truth, not just the part they already know about. Don't wait to be asked. Volunteer the information. If your partner would want to know, tell them. And take your lumps. Because if you want to save your relationship, you have to re-earn trust. Relationship trust is just almost completely destroyed by betrayal, by sex addiction and betrayal. You got to earn it back. It's not going to just be given to you like it was at the beginning of your relationship. So the way you earn it back is to be honest, even when you don't want to be, in every aspect of your life, even the things that seem like they don't matter. Little lies are just as painful to a betrayed partner as big lies at this point, because they're struggling to trust anything you say or do, because you lied about sex and romance. If you're going to lie about something that big, what else are you lying about? They really don't trust you right now. So you got to earn it back. David, I want to bring this question back to our topic for the day, which is developing worthiness, because when we start talking to the guys about denial, we don't start talking about denial. We start talking about shame
Right.
and say, shame drives your denial. Shame is why you lie and keep secrets.
Right.
So is developing worthiness, does the stuff you talked about today relate to being rigorously honest?
Oh, totally. You know, when you think about that pattern of lying, what's really going on there is the person is ashamed that if I really told you what's on my mind, or who I'm attracted to, or what I do, you would leave, you would judge me, and all that. And so that lies basically our way to deal with it. It's, to me, it's evidence of shame. And people are kind of covering it because they're afraid to be honest, because of people are going to leave, or whatever the negative outcome might be. And as I said before, usually when we can be honest, when we're vulnerable, let me say that, when we're vulnerable, people lean in a little bit more. Now, a betrayed spouse has their own issues, right, with anger and hurt and betrayal, and that complicates it all in that relationship, which is why I think this is the issue here in this question, right? This is an issue for the marriage, not necessarily for the other parts of this guy's life. And so, but yeah, I think it's all one big connected thing, right? Shame, the pattern of lying, feeling not good enough, unworthy, and then that whole pattern taking off, and then that dynamic becoming a barrier in recovery to really being totally honest and getting through and breaking through. And I want to say two things too. One, lying by omission is lying, right? Sometimes we think we've had clients, who just, well, if I don't say it, it's not really lying. Well, yeah, it is. Whether we say it or not, if it happened or if it was on our mind, if it's something that we talked about or didn't talk about, it's all lying. And so we have to really take that into account. That's the most important thing I wanted to say about that. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, Dr. Rob's definition of infidelity is the keeping of important secrets in your primary relationship. I mean, so he specifically addresses, lies and secrets, and it's the same thing. I'm trying to manipulate what you know and what you don't know. And it's usually because I'm afraid if you know, you'll leave me, or some version of that. Okay, next one here. I love this question. Can you talk about resentment and keeping score in sex addiction? Is that a form of justification? How does a CSAT help with an addict that has resentment issues, particularly towards their partner? This is a question from the partner. I feel very judged / unaccepted / rejected by him due to his resentment. And I will just add, and maybe you can address both sides of this, I get this question from the addicts too. She's keeping score. What do I do? And the betrayed partner says, he's keeping score. What do I do? And how can a CSAT help?
Right. And this is a common dynamic, right? As the course of the addiction develops, things happen and those get kind of burned into our memories, and we collect those resentments and affronts and hold on to them. The problem with that is that it really bogs us down and kind of keeps us locked up in an emotional space of anger and resentment. And we tell our addicts that resentment is probably the worst kind of thing you can carry around, because resentment in many cases will lead ultimately to a relapse. Resentments are things that addicts carry. That's the anger, it's the recycled anger, if you will. And as Scott just said, the partners have it too. So I think this is something that's really important to talk about. For me, I think it's a matter of taking responsibility for our own feelings, right? Whether you're the addict or the partner. Resentment is kind of blame. It's like somehow I was wronged. And by the way, there's probably nothing more seductive than righteous indignation. It's like, wow, I was really wronged in this, and we can really take that and run with it. And there's nothing wrong with anger, especially I'm speaking now on the part of a betrayed spouse. But anger, remember, is to be talked about and expressed and felt. But resentment is really when we start to hang on to that, right? We're not really letting it go. We're kind of recycling it and adding to it and collecting it and savoring it, if you will, sometimes, and bring it out in arguments and as weapons. We kind of weaponize that sometimes. So I think, yeah, these are all big problems that we need to address. And I think for me, as a CSAT and a therapist, what I would do is really bring it back to the person themselves, because the resentment is a way of distancing the person from their partner. So if I can really own my part in this, the responsibility, and there may be some of that on the partner side too, but largely we're talking about the addict in this regard. But own what I did and own it and feel it and move past it. We haven't used the word tonight, but I like the word humility, right? Which a lot of addicts initially think is humiliation, which is not. Humility actually, I think, is the root of it. It means honesty, right? Humility is saying, yeah, these are the bad things I did, and these are the good things I've done. And it's kind of having that balanced view. And I think getting more of that, getting more ownership, and finally forgiveness. When these toxic attitudes start to swirl around, the first tool I move toward is gratitude, for one thing, because it's to me, that's like a universal antitoxin that kind of clears the air a little bit. And then ultimately forgiveness. I'm not going about it's not a flicking a switch, right? We don't jump to forgiveness. Forgiveness is the end of a long process, but I think we need to be moving toward it. And when I hear people with resentments and keeping score, I think that what I hear is being stuck. There's no movement there toward recovery. And it becomes kind of a game people play. I lob one at you, you lob one at me, and it kind of we're just stuck in this dynamic that nobody enjoys. And it's really destructive to the marriage ultimately too.
Yeah. And when it's the addict who's keeping score, I think it's especially destructive. And I think it comes from 9 times out of 10, it comes from attaching expectations to something. I've been a good boy. Now you have to be nice to me. I bought you a nice gift. You need to reciprocate with either sex or a nice dinner. And the score is lopsided. If you're going to keep score and you're an addict, just recognize that the score is really lopsided right now.
Right.
You got a lot of evening up to do. So if you're going to be nice to your partner that you've cheated on, don't be nice with any kind of an expectation. Be nice because you want to be nice. Be nice because you want your partner to be happy or to experience something good. And don't expect anything. When you attach expectations, you are asking to have a resentment. You're setting yourself up to feel bad. Because a betrayed partner, sometimes they are in a mood to say thank you and do something nice back, but sometimes they're just not. And if you want to even the score, that's okay. You need to be nice just to be nice. You need a lot of that before the score is even, but stop keeping score. This is not a competition. I think you said it, David, earlier. Right. You said, it's not a competition. This is not pie. Love is not pie. If I get a bigger slice of love, it doesn't mean you get less. If you get more love, it doesn't mean I get less. Love is not pie. It's not a zero-sum game. Finite thing.
Yeah.
I give you a bunch of love. Great. There's more love in the world. Expecting back in kind is just not great. And, I've been sober for 6 months. Why won't you pat me on the back? I'm not going to pat you on the back for doing what you were supposed to do from the day we got married, which was be faithful. I'm just going to not scream at you. Okay. That you need a pat on the back, come to me, come to David. If you're an addict and you need a pat on the back, we'll pat you on the back because we're addicts and we know how hard it is to stay sober. Don't expect your betrayed partner to pat you on the back. And
I was going to say that idea of no expectations really is a great principle for recovery in general, right? So for amends, I think a lot of people go through the amends process with the expectation that now it'll be fine, or the relationship will be okay, or they'll get a wow, you've done such great work, thank you. Sometimes it doesn't work that way, right? We do the amends for us. And I think we have to do this behavior for us. And the consequences that hopefully it'll help our relationship and our relationships with friends and other people too. But it really it all starts right here.
Yeah. I mean, and you know, this is also a boundary issue. I mean, we have to stay in our own hula hoop. You know, my recovery is about me, and hopefully our relationship, but it's not about manipulating you into loving me again unconditionally or trusting me again unconditionally. Now, it's you know, if I go in with that attitude, I'm not going to have a very good recovery. You know, my recovery needs to be about me being a better person and being able to look at myself in the mirror. And I find that, you know, when I'm comfortable in my own skin, other people are comfortable with me. When I'm not comfortable in my own skin is when they're not comfortable with me. When I was an addict, uncomfortable in my own skin, nobody wanted to date me because I was a mess. Once I got comfortable in my own skin and was less of a mess, everybody was interested. I was like, which kind of freaked me out. But I get it now. You know, yeah. Anyway, I'm way off topic, I think.
That was good. Good.
All right. This next one here. This is from a trade partner. 17 years with the husband. There's been chronic infidelity and multiple discovery. The latest discovery was 18 months ago. Both parties are working recovery and have CSATs. Great. What kind of message would moving the goalpost on my line in the sand send to him? I've been waiting for disclosure since discovery and set a line in the sand for the end of this month. His CSAT said it won't happen this month and they need a few more sessions, but they do think he can get there, but not this month. So is it okay to move the line in the sand?
I assume that refers to the timing of the disclosure, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean that sometimes people just aren't ready. You know, earlier tonight we had a case where it dragged out too long, I think, but yeah, I think sometimes this is going to happen. The disclosure is a big event for both parties, right? And it takes a lot of emotional preparation and work on the part of the addict and the partner. But I think speaking from the addict's point of view here in this particular question, yeah, I mean the timing may not always fit the original, you know, date that we set for it. However, I think, and I like what you write here, just okay, a few more sessions. That's reasonable to me, right? We can keep working on that and get it, but I don't want to put it off till next year or the year after that. So I think that's all kind of reasonable. Sometimes when I read line in the sand too, I worry that the expectations of what the result of this disclosure will be are changing, right? And we don't want to do that. In fact, I'd leave that just pretty. I totally understand that a partner may not want to commit to a marriage until she gets the full facts. That makes sense to me. But I think sometimes when we talk about moving the line in the sand, it can get confusing. But if we're talking about the schedule of the disclosure, I think that makes perfect sense to me, honestly.
Yeah, and this is different than the disclosure earlier, where it's this nebulous, not ready. It's like
no, exactly.
Sessions. And right. I would push. I think it's perfectly okay for you to say, if not by the end of the month, when? I need a hard and fast date. That is a very reasonable thing to ask for.
I was going to say, this is where boundaries come in, and that's a great boundary. It's like, okay, then this is what my expectation is, right? Yeah, totally reasonable. I agree.
And disclosure is, you know, it's not something that we just say, okay, I'll do disclosure next Tuesday. There is a massive amount of preparation from both of you. I mean, you submit questions to your CSAT, who sends them to his CSAT. He gets the questions, he answers all the questions, plus he adds anything that you didn't ask about that's relevant. I mean, he gets it all in there. And then he and his therapist go through that document line by line to make sure there's no blaming, that he's not using triggering language, that he's not being too graphic, that and then when it's actually like ready to, you know, Sergeant Joe Friday, just the facts, man. You know, just the facts, man. So and then, you know, everybody comes together, all the therapists, and then it's still not over. Often there's a polygraph. I personally am a big fan of the polygraph. Not everyone is, but I'm a big fan of the polygraph. And then you have a response and there's prep for that and another session. And then he has another response. It's like, where he
The restitution.
feels your pain, makes restitution. Here's what I'm going to do. It's not like it happens on Tuesday. It happens Tuesday, and then it happens 3 weeks later, and then it happens 3 weeks after that. And the prep, is extensive, because a poorly executed disclosure does more harm than good. If you don't feel like you got all your questions answered, or you don't feel like you got them answered honestly, if he doesn't pass the polygraph, if his presentation is confusing, if he uses graphic language or triggering language, all of that stuff can really it's a very delicate process. So a little bit of extra time is reasonable, but 6 more months, probably not reasonable.
Yeah, especially in this case where it's stated there's multiple discoveries, right? So there's a lot going on there. Right? And
yeah, it's time to get it out.
It's time to get it out, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I can see why the spouse would be, interested in having this thing happen because of just history. And so that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, as Scott says, it's a long process, but it's one that I think can happen reasonably within a matter of months from treatment, for example.
Yeah, and relationships, couples who have disclosure, proper full therapeutic disclosure, the couples will almost unanimously say this is when our relationship started to heal. Because I can be rigorously honest all I want, but until you know that you know everything, you're still going to struggle to trust me.
Right.
But once I've given the full disclosure with my therapist and your therapist and you, and you've been able to ask questions, and we've gone through the whole process, and I've passed the polygraph, you know everything. You can start to trust me again. It's not a light switch, David. You said that it's not a light switch. You're still not going to trust me. Boom. Okay, great. But you can start. Yeah. So yeah, this is when the relationship starts to heal up. Up until then, I, as an addict, have been healing. You, as a betrayed partner, have been healing. But it's been more about us as individuals, more about me being a sober person and you being a supported person, because betrayed partners, you didn't cause this, but boy, have you been affected by it. Right. And you deserve support. And we want you to have support. You deserve support. So it's about you getting the support you need, me getting the help and guidance and push that I need. And now we're ready to come together when we've got a little healing under us individually, to do this full therapeutic disclosure and let the relationship start to heal.
I just want to, Scott, you mentioned kind of the progression, and I think just from a therapist point of view, I think we talk about CSATs, we talk about couples therapists, a lot of different kind of specialties here, I think, but I really just want to underscore something you said, that in the early recovery, the addict is kind of doing their thing and the partner is doing their thing, right? In their own work, their own versions of trauma and history, and getting clean and honest, and on both sides, right? So I think if we start to engage the couple too soon in that process, certainly before disclosure, I think it's probably not time well spent. The one exception to that, I think a couples therapist can be really valuable early in the process for communication skills. So people can learn how to talk, so they can check in, or so they get an argument, they can argue in a healthy way, right? Not in a destructive way. But to your point, where I see a couples therapist or somebody or couples work, it can be done for the CSAT, where it really starts to become effective is after disclosure, just to your point, where the relationship is now ready to start healing. Both parties have done their work for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months, and now we can work on us. And I think that's where it's a slightly different shift in emphasis and therapeutic approach. But I think that's a really good sequence to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to reiterate David's point, early in the process, a couples therapist can be really helpful with, here is how some boundaries around how we're going to talk to each other.
Yep.
you know, you need to sleep in the other room right now. You know, she's not comfortable in the same bed with you, things like that. You know, it helps to have a mediator whose client is the relationship. A couples counselor, their client is the relationship. You're not the client. Your partner's not the client. Your relationship is the client. So early on, basically the couples counselor's role is, how are you going to navigate not killing each other for the next 3 or 4 months? Let's just deal with that, and then we'll come back and deal with deeper relationship issues and things like that.
Right. And healing, right? Because the healing part of it is a whole different set of tasks and skills,
right,
and work. So,
absolutely.
yeah.
And David, you've seen it, I've seen it. Relationships of two people who are in the process of recovery together, one way or another, are often stronger in the end than they were before discovery even.
I've seen that numerous times, right? When couples do the work, you know, and they both, there's a clean slate, right? With that honest disclosure and some trust can start to evolve, and people start to do the work. It's a different relationship. It's a whole different thing. And you know, to go back to what we're talking about tonight is developing worthiness. I think that's a process that's subtle sometimes, but it's part of both pathways for both the partner and the addict, is to start working on these subtle internal issues that then get reflected in the relationship as they start to work on us. You know, that we go from I and me to us and we, and that's a big shift for people, especially for an addict.
Yeah, I mean, we're as we heal, as we develop worthiness, we're able to be more vulnerable, and we're able to receive vulnerability, and that is the intimacy that we all crave,
Right.
and that's usually missing when one of us is an active addict.
I would say always missing, but
yeah, probably. So we're out of time. We're also out of questions. Thank you everybody for being here. Great topic, David. Great questions today. Anything you want to say to take us out this week?
No, just I so appreciate the questions and the insight everybody has, and just this work on worthiness is a lifelong piece of work, but it does get better, and a lot of it is undoing, and then there's a building phase, and that's the fun part.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you everybody for being here. We'll be back next week. We'll see you then.
Thanks, take care. Bye-bye.